An Englishman, an Australian, and a Frenchman walk into a podcast. The results are today's show. And I guess we could fairly also say that a American did too, because he's here to react. Today we have a little bit of a different, little lower energy conversation. And I'm really appreciating the conversations that we're able to do, especially on the Unbelievable podcast, because it's very jovial. And even though they do kind of get tense at times, I'm really appreciating this part of the series. So guys, if you like the conversation episodes, like them. Please subscribe to the channel. If you're not subscribed, please like these videos. Let me know what you like or what you'd like to see done next, and we will try and get to your suggestions. Put it in the comment section. Not enough of you are doing that. If you guys have something, some conversation, some debate, even just a topic you want me to react to, review, happy to do that. Just put that down, and whoever gets the most upvotes, that's the one we'll probably go with. But right now the queue is open, so you can start putting some recommendations to anything that you just your heart desires for me to do, and I'll take a look at that. Today, though, we have, and his name's so hard for me to pronounce, but I think it's Guillaume, Guillaume or Guillaume. I mean, if you're French, let me know. Bignon. So Guillaume Bignon. If you just want to do it French, it's way easier to say it that way. And one of my favorite atheists of all time, which is Graham Oppy. I think by far Graham is the best exponent, person to expound the atheistic system. Just seems like a genuinely nice guy. Good faith, a sharp as a tack debater, just intellect that's so incredibly smart, and but very balanced and very nuanced. As far as atheism goes, I think that he is by far the best proponent of that system right now. Especially in a world where there's a lot of, kind of in that community where there's a lot of vitriol from some of the, and some superficialness from some of the lead, or at least past exponents of it, like Hitchens, who I loved, but who was very superficial in a lot of his critiques, and Dawkins, who I don't think really has a grasp of what he's critiquing. I think Oppy, on the other hand, is very, very familiar and a formidable opponent for Christian apologists. But from my perspective, I just want to say one of my favorite philosophers, to be honest, just in his character and his comportment. So, yeah, I know he's on your side of the aisle. If you're an atheist or an agnostic, I just want to pay my respects to him. And we're discussing religious experiences today, and seeing that can be a case for God. I'm excited to get into this and just to look more into this side. A lot of times we look at logical proofs, and although I love logical proofs, what about experiences that people have? A lot of even atheist scholarship bring up the, well, not response, but they bring up the idea that religious experiences can actually be the best proofs for God, right? Where arguments can't get you. And I think that could be, I think that could be right. I think that there is a lot of layers to the onion, and if we unpeel at the heart of things, especially in persuasion, logic, ontological arguments, cosmological arguments, logic doesn't just get you there, right? But when you know people who say, hey, look at my relationship with Christ and my life, how it's turned around and changed, and the joy that I have, and I want to share that with you. Those are deeply important too, and I don't think they should be discounted. So let's take a look at kind of Oppy. Both the stories of, we're coming in a little bit late on this one, so 17 minutes in. I'd recommend watching the full thing. Bignon has already, or Bignon, or however you'd say that, has already given his story of how he was an atheist and became a Christian, and we're going to get into a little bit of Graham Oppy's story here as well.
Okay, can I say one thing, just in kind of general response to the story that we just heard and then maybe you can ask me that question again. So it seems to me that Guillaume's experience as an atheist was very different from mine. So from the time that I became an atheist, I had lots of friends who were Christian theists. I had friends that were belonged to other religions as well. And over the course of my career, I've supervised PhDs by Catholic priests. I've supervised PhDs by other people who are Christians. Throughout my life, I've had interactions with Christians, and I never thought that being a religious believer, being a Christian, or being some other kind, being a Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, was irrational or crazy or anything like that. And that's a really important difference between my experience of being an atheist and Guillaume's, I think, at least the way that it's presented in the book. So I just wanted to say that at the beginning.
Yeah, no, and that's a helpful distinction because one thing I know about you, Graham, is you're very generous and
Can I
open
say that again?
and you
I know I just sang his praises. Man, I really like Graham Oppy. I really like him. He's in my opinion, and it's not to pit anyone against another one, but like he exudes the love of Christ, which that maybe sound like a backhanded compliment, but like his comportment with just his jovialness, his respect for other people, and how he treats other people is exactly in line with how Jesus says that Christians should act. And he puts a great deal of Christians to shame. Like he exemplars that in his actions. And I just admire that about the guy. I mean, I'd love to have him on. I mean, goodness, we're a little bit too small for that, but sometime, man, I'd love to get him on and have him on for an interview. Um, I really do like Graham. I really like Graham. He is the perfect example of who you should be if you want to win people to your side. Now, again, disagree with him. I'm not an atheist, but he's just one of the nicest guys there is. Like, even in the way that he frames that. Like, yeah. Anyway, so there's my fanboying for Graham Oppy there.
someone who doesn't simply dismiss people because they're religious. Now, obviously, there is that type of atheist out there, and on the internet especially. It's interesting that obviously, though, your experience as an atheist was very different in that respect. I mean, when it comes to Guillaume's own story, where do you begin in terms of a response to that? In terms of sort of, I guess you're happy that he got to a place where he was obviously felt happy and more, flourishing and so on in his own life. I guess you just wouldn't see that necessarily that points to the idea that there is ultimately a God behind it.
So part of the thing here is that there are plenty of stories that go both ways. Guillaume's story is quite familiar. There are lots of people who are living a life where they're kind of unsatisfactory. They've come to feel dissatisfied with their values, and and they're not really finding meaning in what they're doing, and so on. And then there's this transition, and they end up in a place that seems much better. They feel like they've got values that fit to them. They find meaning in their life, and so on. But these stories go both ways. As we know, in the West, there's been a bit of a drift away from Christianity. There are lots of people who have stories like Guillaume's that run in reverse. And that's going to be a kind of question about the kind of evidential value of the story. That's not to cast any aspersions on people who go either way, right? It's just that when you're thinking about what's the total evidence here, there are stories in both directions. So it's not clear that the kind of existence of the stories is going to cut much ice one way or the other, right? But the point that you made, that it's good to end up in a place where you're comfortable with your values and everything. So I think that's right up to a point. I mean, I also kind of like the idea that, you never really settle, that there's all these kind of, you can always improve, right? And so you don't want it to turn into complacency. But on the other hand, you don't want to be kind of torn apart by dissatisfaction, thinking that your life's meaningless, that the values that you've got were kind of ones you don't really want to avow anymore, and so on.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, that's because personal experiences, religious experiences are subjective. And that's why a lot of people run away from them in proofs. We don't like to go subjective at all, especially in our Western concepts. Westernized thinking wants objective. Give me the objective. Give me something I can tangibly hold to, right? Give me the Kalam cosmological argument, which I love that argument. Give me the universe needs a beginning. You know, everything that begins to exist has a beginning. The universe had a beginning. Therefore, the universe had to begin at some point, right? So Jesus, not Jesus, but God created it, right? Or the ontological argument, or all these other ones that come out of teleological or moral. Those are objective. But we often downplay subjective because how do you test subjective? And Graham does a good job at pointing that out. Like, there's stories of Christians becoming atheists, atheists becoming Christians, Christians becoming Muslims, Muslims becoming Jews, Jews becoming Hindu, Hindus becoming Muslim. Like, all these different stories exist, and they're rather subjective. There's no way to test them out. Whose is correct, whose is not correct. And that's why I say subjective truths and proofs have their place in the discourse, but that discourse is a little bit different, right? It's different than just the straight up logical proofs that you're going to use and they're going to be tried and true and tested, forever, right? If you want to, the logical proofs could be representative of a hammer to break something apart, but the subjective proofs and truths can be represented by glue, right? You want to break down the vase, right? But you also want to glue it back together in a new way. So I think we could put those together. The objective proofs for God are necessary, but how many people change their life radically based on a fact? Some people do, but most times people emulate other people or things that they see working, right? You want to emulate your hero, right? You want to emulate the success of your neighbor. Well, same if you see the joy of the Lord in someone. If you see a true Christian heart of service and someone who loves people and who cares for people and cares for their soul, and you see the joy that's about them, that's something that you want. Like and that's subjective, right? Or sorry, it's subjective. When you ask them, like, why do you have this hope inside of you, and they say, well, Jesus came to me one time, like our God spoke to me, like what Gelm is saying or has said beforehand about God laying out the circumstances and having his hands in all things. But those are subjective. You can't prove those things necessarily. Yet the stories are something people want to follow. People don't just want to follow the facts. They want to follow the story, right? They want to follow in the footsteps of the story that you had. Now, at the same time, Graham makes a good point that you just can't use that as you can't take the objective out of its place and replace it with the subjective, and put the objective where the subjective should be. There needs to be a proper series to that, and I think subjectivity is great to aid in conversion, but maybe not the best in argumentation. However, let's see how this goes.
But it doesn't sound in your story, Guillaume, that you were exactly. I think you were quite happy with your life up to that point. I don't think you were in some kind of existential despair and looking for purpose in life. It doesn't sound like that was the kind of person you were when these set of events suddenly transpired.
So those events did bring me to this place of crisis, at least morally, with the reactivation of my conscience and the guilt that was associated with that. Prior to those, certainly no, I was very happy and enjoying my life very much. There was one moment of questioning existentially, wondering like, what is this? Like, what's the point of all of this? At the point where I was starting to be successful enough in all of those avenues that I felt like, I was the dog who caught the car, and then now what? So there was a bit of questioning there, but I quickly moved on and didn't really retain much of a reflection about whether God is necessary to have a good meaning for human lives or any such question. That was more in passing. As far as the experiences and going both ways, I guess it's the sheer existence of a person who changes their mind is not itself a very strong evidence or a testimony. I'm hoping that, obviously my story, I have no pretension that my story should be this knockdown argument, like, you've heard my story, you should be a Christian, and if you're still an atheist, this is crazy of you not to continue to resist. But I do hope that my story has a little bit more weight than just simply saying, well, some person changed their minds. I think that some elements in my story speak of providential design in ways that are a little bit more unexpected if Christianity is true than they are if atheism is true, particularly some of the unexpected experiences, some of the very improbable events that seem to drive in the direction, with the improbable hitchhiking, the improbable address of the hotel being next door to ours, and then that experience coming out of the church when I was trying to escape. So those improbabilities in the story that kind of speak to a grand design, I think speak a little bit more than just, hey, there's this guy, he changed his mind, so therefore you should do the same.
So I guess I wasn't thinking.
And one thing, by the way, I love the accent that Guillaume has. He's a proper Frenchman. You barely ever hear this sort of accent before. I love that. I do accent work on the side, guys. Temporarily, and then you have kind of Graham Oppy here, who has an Australian accent, but it's also sort of delayed. And then Justin Brierley, who has this, sort of British thing. So humor me, guys. I love accents. I love the accent. It is perfect. But outside of that, that is a good point that he brings up, and that is, yes, it's a subjective experience. I don't expect that to be like a knockdown, drag out defeater, but even in subjective experiences and subjective things, there are these little objective truths, or at least things that are, you would have to throw them into coincidence. And, you'd have to throw so much into coincidence that at a certain point, those coincidences start to become a proof in of themselves. That if you have 100 coincidences that take place in the span of, I don't know, let's put it this way. If you have 100 coincidences that take place in the span of 12 hours, or let's say you have a dice, right? And you're rolling the dice, and you roll the dice 100 times, right? There's 6 sides to a dice. What are the chances that it comes up 1 every single time? Relatively low. I'm not sure what exactly they are, but statistical probabilities would put that way out. But what if it does happen that way? What if you roll it 100 times, and 100 times that rolls to a 1? Can we chalk that up to coincidence? Yeah, you can. You could say that was a coincidence. But each time it rolls a 1, right, it starts, the case becomes better for it not being a coincidence. The first time, okay. Second time, coincidence. Third time, strange coincidence, but still coincidence. The fourth time, fifth time, sixth time. By the time you get to the 10th time, it starts to be like, to defend the coincidence hypothesis, I'm going into logical, impossibilities where it's still possible. Well, okay, logical improbabilities where it's still possible it was a coincidence. But if there's things that happen in your subjective experience that you just can't attribute to coincidence, and there aren't good explanations for them, maybe one time you can say it was a coincidence. But if it happens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, it starts to seem divinely providential and not coincidental. So there is an objective nature even to the subjective realm here, and that's kind of what Guillaume is getting at.
I was actually thinking about specific examples. So think about Anthony Kenny, who's a very well-known philosopher. He was ordained as a Catholic priest. He spent about 5 years as a curate. And then he became an agnostic over a period of time, and he's remained as an agnostic ever since. And he gives a very, he's written a couple of autobiographies that give accounts of what happened to him and what happened to his beliefs. It's not like, there aren't really very interesting stories on the other side, right, with details. On the specific point about the kind of improbabilities, and this goes back to the thing that Justin said right at the beginning, there are lots of things in life that happen that really are merely coincidental, right? And there's no problem thinking there are 7 billion people on the planet. There are these scripts. The conversion script is a very familiar script in our culture. It's not at all surprising that there are lots of people who fall into it, and when they fall into it, there are certain coincidences along the way, right? So from the point of view of someone who thinks that's a nice story, but I don't think that there's anything kind of supernatural that sits behind it, that's the kind of response that they're most likely going to give. That's not to impugn you for taking a different view about it, especially because it's your experience, right? But that's what I think a kind of response is likely to be.
Yeah, and So from your point of view, that the more rational way of looking at Guillaume's story is that these coincidences were coincidences; they weren't divinely ordained, and so on. Um, I mean, why then, Guillaume? You know, I'm sure you've
And
met this.
I think that another thing he'd say is, you just as easily could have missed one of those coincidences. It may not have coincidentally happened to you, and you would have a completely different story, right? Maybe you would have stayed an atheist. Maybe you would have converted to Islam. Who knows? But I guess he'd say there's all these scripts that you can go on, right? And you just happen to be one in 7 billion that found its way into this script, right? And I guess that's a fair way to put it. Honestly, at the end of the day, you look at what happens, the coincidences of the world, the stories that people are on, and you come to one or two conclusions that they are all merely coincidental. And since you could have gone one way or another, the fact that you're here and you're a Christian is just the fact that you went, you know. Well, a better way of it's late, but a better way of putting this would be, if everybody is in a maze, right, and you have 10 different stops, and you're in the maze, and each time you get to a stop, there's two doors to go down, door one and door two, right, and you randomly pick one. Or the next door, you pick two, you pick one next time, two, 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 one, two. At the end of all your 10 stops, you end up at a place, right? Far different than anyone else because of all of the possible ways you could have gone, right? And now expand that out and say each stop has 100 ways to go, right? And just 10 stops, and you pick your way, and then you do it all randomly, and then when you get to where you are, let's say that you get to I don't know, a fountain, right? But someone else gets to a field, and someone else gets to a sheep barn, and someone else gets to a factory, and like everybody goes to a different place. Do you say it was providential that I showed up in the fountain, or was it just the process of random chance that got me to the fountain? Anyone could have gotten to the fountain. It's just I happened to be the one who picked those routes, and I could have easily gotten to the field, and I could have easily have gotten to the factory, right? That's a way to look at it. The other way of looking at it is I was designed to get to the fountain, right? And my steps were providentially led to get me to the fountain because that was my purpose, right? Those are two fair ways of looking at it. And there's no real way to parse out which one's right about that, actually. Was it all random that I got here? Or was it a divinely led that I showed up here? Was I divinely guided to go through the doors that I went through? And I can easily see how Galm could possibly come down on the latter of the proposition, and that you have Graham who's just kind of coming down on the negative of that position, right? So one takes the affirmative, one takes the negative, and then obviously Justin, I'm not sure what he takes. So it's not quite Justin's accent. That was a little too much Newcastle. But all right, here we go.
This kind of objection before. Why for you should we take your interesting, specifics of your story as perhaps being more than just, the outworking of what happens when 7 billion people on the planet, interesting things happen,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have an argument to give you for why you should believe that this is the way that it should be interpreted. I think that it's more of an experience that it seems very interesting to see those providentially, like seemingly providential improbabilities, and they spoke directly to my existential situation as well. So yeah, it was a mix of the intellectual reasons, the barriers falling down, being challenged with the historical data about the New Testament, and the overall grand story with those improbable experiences that together made for a explosive the conversion story. I think that's perhaps one place where we can start explore a little bit the relationship between the intellectual and the experiential with the religious experience. And I would assume that they are both serving, in a sense, at least in my case, they both serve to justify what happened to me, to make it that I'm not crazy, that I became a Christian in that light. And perhaps it's a good place to ask Graham a little bit about his view on those things, because he's on record in the literature for saying that in light of the arguments at least, and perhaps other things, Christians are, it's rationally permissible to be a Christian. So you correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you're saying that the arguments leave it open that it's rationally permissible to be either one or the other, a theist or an atheist. And I'm curious if you think that this rational permissibility comes straight from the arguments, or does it come from perhaps a mix of like arguments and a conversion story like mine? Like, would you say that the experience also contributes to make it permissible, like that it is not an irrational decision to make, that sort of a thing? What do you think?
So I think you've characterized my view pretty accurately. So I think that the arguments are just on both sides. Add them up, find the best arguments you can. They're not compelling. So that is, they don't compel people to arrive at a particular position. The arguments just aren't strong enough. I do think, I mean, this will speak to part of what you said. I've read quite a few sort of autobiographical sketches by contemporary Christian philosophers. There's a couple of books that came out in the 80s and 90s where lots of philosophers of religion in North America kind of told a little bit of their life story. And it turns out that quite a few of those philosophers claim never to have had a religious experience, right? They're Christian philosophers, but they kind of regret the fact that they never had anything like Pascal's Night of Fire or even anything sort of remotely like that. And so I'm inclined to think that sort of you don't need the experiential foundation in order for it to be rational for you to be a Christian. The kind of considerations that you might put together as a purely intellectual case, it seems like that can be enough. So the kind of people I've got in mind, I'm pretty sure that Bill Alston was one person, and I suspect maybe that Alvin Plantinga is another. Maybe I'm not remembering the details quite correctly. But I think that he also said that he'd never had anything like that. I mean, of course, religious experience might mean other things. It might mean like going to church and joining in the singing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that's the kind of thing that in the kind of in the historical record, in the literature, is the kind of thing that might lead sort of pretty directly to conversion, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I love to say, just on what he said there, thank God that God works with all of us based on our needs and who we are and our personalities. There's some people, I think he's right, there's some people probably maybe haven't had a religious experience, kind of that Pascal's Night of Fire or the heaven opening up and you seeing God or those kinds of things. I don't doubt they happen, but there's people who don't have that, right? And they are compelled to believe in God for completely different reasons, and maybe it is all logical reasons, maybe it is all objective reasons, but that's their personality. But more emotionally driven people, some of them do have experiences, some of them need experiences, some of that is what gets them to faith in Christ. And God works with us in independent ways, different ways, and that's remarkable. And he knows all of us and the intricacies of all of us. So yeah, I'd say if you haven't had a religious experience, don't feel bad. I mean, God works with us in different ways. So I do. And again, I love the charity at which Oppy discusses these things, and he just brings that kind of charity into his conversations. Also, I love the way he dresses, man. Like there's a lot of especially theologians, atheist, Christian, whatever. They dress in kind of a highfalutin way where they're like, kind of above you. And I have nothing against that, but I do like, every time you see Graham, he's just sitting there, the smartest one in the room, and he's got his hoodie on, kind of like looks like a 7-year-old on his way to his first day of school. He's just the best, man. I love Graham.
Yeah, so in terms of justifying Christian belief, right, on making it rationally permissible, so you're open to saying that the arguments could do some of that, that an experience could do some of that as well, presumably. Like neither sounds like it's strictly necessary, but they could separately justify Christian belief along the lines that you suggest.
Yeah, so I think that you could be a Christian and think that the foundation of your belief really lies in these amazing experiences that you had, or you could be a Christian and think, actually, when I weighed up all of the considerations, my judgment was that this was where the truth lies. And either of those could work.
Yeah, good that.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love. Let's go to a quick break, and we'll come back on this. And I'd love you to spell out maybe just some examples from your own story, Guillaume, of where you feel that the.
I'll end it there, and I don't really want to actually, but this is going to be a bit of a shorter video because I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. This is by far the best conversation that we've done on the channel, just in how it exuberates Christian charity. Right? This is how we should have conversations with one another. These are the dialogues we should strive for with people who disagree with us. And I'm saying that not just for Christians, but atheists, anyone who wants to have a dialogue. Model it after Guillaume and Graham and Justin here. This is a perfect example of two people with diametrically opposed views, by the way. And they're getting along, they're being charitable, they're being respectful, and it just makes you like them. All three of these people. It makes you like, it seems like they would be the best people to have on an interview. And by the way, I'd love to have all three of them on sometime for an interview and a discussion. Again, Graham Oppy is just a nice person. Like he said, now I don't know him personally, maybe he's not, but I mean, like, and every time I see him, I find him to be like a very charitable, great articulator of his viewpoint, theological maybe not, but an intellectual giant, a titan, and Guillaume as well, just very, very gifted in his belief system. And Justin is an excellent interviewer. I don't often do this, and I know that I have atheists on this channel as well, and they probably will be here because of Graham Oppy's name. So, and this is not meant to be a backhanded, attack on anyone, but just mainly to my Christian subscribers or that are on here, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox. Let's pray for Graham, because I mean, we pray for everyone, but specifically let's pray for Graham, because I think that Graham is closer to the kingdom than what people may think. I honestly do, and I don't know his heart. I don't know the man particularly, but I think we all should do that. I'm going to commit to doing that. I hope that we all can do that. And let's pray for our both Christian and non-Christian brothers all the time. But that's what we're here as a community for, by the way, to foster more of that, especially among Christian people. Pray for your Catholic brothers that are, overseas and struggles, and hostile regimes. Catholics, pray for your Protestant brothers and their troubles. Protestants, pray for your Catholic brothers. Catholics, pray for your Orthodox brothers. Orthodox, pray for your Protestant and Catholic brothers. We need to show more unity, and all of us pray for our unsaved loved ones, whether they be atheist, agnostic, whatever else they are, and let's foster that community where we show true Christian charity towards everyone, malice towards none, the love of Christ towards all, until the day that He comes back. That's post-millennialism for you guys right there. Let's build out the kingdom of God, but not build it out through force or coercion or manipulation, but build it out through love, charity, and goodwill, to where the nations would see our joy and our love and be like, man, I want to be a part of that. I can't not be a part of that. And to where your neighbors would knock down, crash in through the doors of the church to get in on the incredible unity, love, and joy that exists there. That's what we should be in all things. Again, love this debate. Perfectly loved everything that Guillaume had to say, everything that Oppy had to say, and Justin, obviously. So tell me what you want next. Subscribe, guys. Thank you guys for being here. You guys are the reason I do what I do. It is so fantastic to watch you guys interact with my content, and I appreciate it. We will see you in the next one.